She doesn't deserve a cent, my mother-in-law said during the will reading. They snatched the check, burned it, and laughed. Now you have nothing. I didn't blink. Because the check was just a prop. The real money? Already miles away, and out of their reach forever. She doesn't deserve a cent. Those words hit me like a slap across the face, but they weren't said at Tim's will reading. No, Skylar Morrison first said them to me 3 years earlier, standing in her kitchen while Tim was upstairs taking a shower. I was washing dishes after Sunday dinner, trying to be helpful, trying to fit in. She thought I couldn't hear her talking to her sister on the phone. I'm telling you, Janet, she's just waiting for him to put a ring on it so she can get her hands on the Morrison money. Girls like that always are. I froze, my hands still in the soapy water. Girls like what? I wanted to ask. Girls who worked double shifts at the hospital? Girls who grew up in apartments instead of mansions? Girls whose parents drove used cars and shopped at discount stores? But I didn't say anything. I never did back then. Tim came down the stairs, his hair still damp, smiling at me the way he always did. Like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Ready to go, babe? I nodded, dried my hands, and followed him out. Skylar watched us leave with that cold smile of hers. The one that said she knew something I didn't. That was the beginning of everything falling apart, though I didn't know it yet. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of justice and resilience. If you believe that family should protect, not destroy, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. Tim and I had met at a coffee shop near the hospital where I worked. He was there every morning at 7:30, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and a blueberry muffin. I was grabbing something quick between shifts, exhausted and probably looking it. But when our eyes met across the crowded cafe, he smiled. Not the polite smile you give strangers, but a real one. Long night? He asked, nodding toward my scrubs. The longest, I laughed, and something about the way he listened, really listened, made me want to tell him more. We talked for 20 minutes that first morning. Then 30 the next day. Within a week, I was looking forward to those coffee conversations more than anything else in my day. Tim was different from other guys I'd dated. He asked questions about my work, remembered details about my patients, made me feel like what I did mattered. He didn't tell me about his family's money right away. When he finally mentioned Morrison Industries, I had to look it up online. Construction and real estate development. Big contracts all over the state. The kind of company that builds shopping centers and office complexes. The kind of family that has money. Real money. Why didn't you tell me? I asked him over dinner at a restaurant that probably cost more than I made in a week. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I wanted you to know me first. Not my family's bank account. I understood that. I'd grown up around people who treated you differently based on what your parents did for work. But I also felt a little sick, wondering if I would have acted differently around him if I'd known from the start. Meeting his family should have been exciting. Tim talked about them constantly. His mom who ran charity events, his sister Emma who was in law school, family dinners every Sunday. He made it sound warm and close, the kind of family I'd always wished I had. The first Sunday dinner was at their house in the hills. Not just a house, an estate. The kind of place you see in magazines with a circular driveway and actual columns. I spent 10 minutes in my car working up the courage to walk to the front door. Skylar answered, and I knew immediately I was in trouble. She looked me up and down like she was calculating my worth. My dress, the nicest one I owned, suddenly felt cheap. My shoes felt wrong. Even my purse felt inadequate under her gaze. You must be Kelly, she said, but the way she said my name made it sound like something distasteful. Tim appeared beside her, grinning. Mom, isn't she beautiful? Lovely, Skylar said, but her eyes said otherwise. Dinner was torture. Every question felt like a test I was failing. What did my father do? He was a mechanic. Where did I go to school? Community college, then state university. Had I traveled much? Only to visit my grandmother in Florida. Emma tried to help, asking about my work at the hospital, but even that backfired when Skylar said, "How noble. Of course, nursing is more of a service job, isn't it?" Tim's jaw tightened. Mom. What? I'm just saying it's admirable. Not everyone can be in business or law. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to explain that I wasn't just in nursing. I specialized in pediatric cardiac care, helped kids recover from heart surgeries, sometimes held their hands when their parents couldn't be there. But under Skylar's stare, all of that felt small and insignificant. The worst part was watching Tim change around her. The confident, funny man I'd fallen in love with became quiet and careful. He stopped touching my hand. He stopped making jokes. It was like watching someone slowly deflate. After dinner, while Tim was getting our coats, Skylar cornered me in the hallway. "Tim's always been too trusting," she said quietly. "Too generous with his heart. I hope you understand what a responsibility that is." "I love him," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. She smiled that cold smile again. "I'm sure you do, dear. The question is whether you love him or what he can provide." I wanted to scream that I'd been taking care of myself long before I met Tim, that I didn't need anyone's money, that I'd fallen in love with him before I even knew about the family business. But something in her eyes told me it wouldn't matter what I said. Our wedding planning was a nightmare. Skylar had opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, the music, my dress. She never said anything was wrong directly. He was too smart for that. Instead, she'd say things like, "Interesting choice," or, "I suppose that works," in a tone that made it clear nothing worked. The worst fight came over the guest list. I wanted to invite people from work, friends from nursing school, my extended family. Skylar kept suggesting we keep it intimate and focus on family friends. "Some of these people," she said, looking at my list, "might feel out of place at a Morrison wedding." "They're my friends," I said. "Of course, dear. I just want everyone to be comfortable." What she meant was that she didn't want my friends, people who worked regular jobs and lived in regular houses, mixing with her country club crowd. Like we might contaminate them somehow. Tim tried to smooth things over, but I could see the stress wearing on him. He started having headaches, staying late at work, avoiding conversations about wedding details. I began to wonder if we should just elope. But we didn't. We had the wedding Skylar wanted, at the country club she belonged to, with her friends and business associates filling most of the seats. My side looked tiny in comparison. My parents looked overwhelmed and out of place, which probably made Skylar happy. During the reception, I overheard her talking to one of her friends near the bar. "She seems sweet," the friend said. "Oh, she is," Skylar replied. "Very earnest. I just hope Tim doesn't live to regret being so generous." Generous. Like marrying me was charity work. That's when I realized this wasn't going to get better. Skylar Morrison had decided I wasn't good enough for her son, and nothing I did would change her mind. Every family dinner, every holiday, every interaction would be a reminder that I was the outsider who'd somehow tricked her way into their perfect family. But Tim loved me. That had to be enough. For a while it was. We moved into our own house. A compromise between what I could afford and what he was used to. We found our rhythm as a married couple. Tim started standing up to his mother more, defending my choices, our choices. I thought maybe we'd won. Then we started trying to have a baby. Month after month of disappointment. Tests and procedures and uncomfortable conversations with doctors. Skylar's pointed questions about when we were planning to give her grandchildren. Her suggestions about fertility specialists she'd heard about through her charity work connections. "Maybe you should see Dr. Richardson," she said one Sunday. "The Weatherbys used him when Patricia was having trouble." Of course, she was quite a bit younger than you when they started trying. I was 28. Hardly ancient. But Skylar made it sound like I'd waited too long, been too selfish, focused too much on my career instead of my biological clock. The fertility clinic felt like stepping into another world. Everything was hushed and expensive and full of hope that came with a price tag. We sat through consultations about IVF, egg retrieval, success rates. Tim held my hand through all of it, but I could see the numbers adding up in his head. "We can afford this," he said when we got the treatment plan. "Whatever it takes." But we both knew what whatever it takes meant. It meant using Morrison money. It meant being even more indebted to a family that already thought I was taking advantage of their son. We decided to go through with the egg retrieval and freezing. It felt like buying hope and storing it for later when we were braver or luckier or both. The procedure went well. Somewhere in a lab across town, our potential children were waiting in frozen suspension. "When we're ready," Tim said afterward, squeezing my hand. "We thought we had time to get ready. We thought we had years to figure out when the moment would be right." Then Tim got sick. The diagnosis came fast and brutal. Pancreatic cancer already spreading. Months, not years. Maybe a year if we were lucky and the treatment worked. Skylar moved in the next day. She said she wanted to help, but help felt like being invaded. Suddenly our house wasn't ours anymore. She reorganized the kitchen, threw out food she didn't approve of, scheduled appointments without asking us first. She researched treatments online and printed out articles about miracle cures and alternative therapies. "I'm just trying to save my son," she'd say whenever I tried to object to something. Like I wasn't trying to save my husband. Tim got sicker, weaker. The treatments weren't working. But Skylar kept pushing. More doctors, more tests, more hope that felt increasingly desperate. I watched my husband disappear under the weight of his mother's expectations and the cancer eating him alive. The night before he died, she finally went home to sleep in her own bed. We were alone for the first time in weeks. Tim could barely keep his eyes open, but his voice was clear when he spoke. "Kelly." His hand found mine in the dark. "Don't let them win." He didn't say who them was. He didn't need to. "I won't," I whispered, not knowing what I was promising or how I would keep it. But I meant it. Whatever came next, however they tried to erase me from Tim's life, from his memory, from his family, I wouldn't let them win. I had no idea then how far they would go. Or that I already had everything I needed to fight back, waiting frozen in a clinic across town. 3 days. That's all the time Skylar gave me to grieve before she called. I was sitting on our bedroom floor, going through Tim's clothes when my phone rang. His favorite sweater was in my lap. The blue one I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. It still smelled like him. "Kelly." Her voice was sharp, businesslike. "We need to settle Tim's affairs. Tomorrow at 2. The lawyer's office downtown." "Tomorrow." My voice cracked. "Skylar, I buried him yesterday. I understand you're emotional, but these things can't wait. There are debts to consider, properties to transfer. Legal matters don't pause for feelings." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, still holding Tim's sweater. Emotional. Like grief was just an inconvenience she had to work around. I should have known something was wrong when I arrived at the lawyer's office and saw them all there. Not just Skylar, but her brother Robert, her sister Janet, even cousins I'd only met at the wedding. They filled the conference room like they were attending a business meeting, not settling their dead son's estate. "Kelly," Skylar said without getting up. "How nice of you to join us." Like I was late. Like I was intruding on family business. Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, looked uncomfortable. He'd known Tim since he was a child, had probably handled Morrison legal affairs for decades. But even he seemed surprised by the crowd. "Perhaps we should start," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Timothy's will is relatively straightforward. As his spouse, Kelly inherits the primary residence and personal effects. There's also a life insurance policy and several investment accounts." I barely heard the details. Numbers floated past me. The house, Tim's car, his 401k. Things that had been ours became mine, but they felt meaningless without him there. Then Mr. Harrison mentioned something that made me sit up straighter. "There's also a substantial inheritance from Timothy's grandfather's trust. $2.7 million, to be distributed to his heirs." The room went completely silent. Skylar's face changed. The polite mask slipped and I saw something hungry underneath. "I'm sorry, what was that about grandfather's trust?" Mr. Harrison shuffled through his papers. "Yes, it's been accumulating interest for 20 years. Timothy was the primary beneficiary. As his widow, Kelly inherits the full amount." That's when Skylar exploded. "Absolutely not." She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "That money has been in our family for generations. She has no right to it. Actually, Mrs. Morrison, according to the legal documents." "I don't care what the documents say." Her voice was getting louder, more desperate. "She was married to him for 5 years. I'm his mother. I raised him. I sacrificed everything for that boy." I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. The woman who'd spent years making me feel like an outsider was now having a complete breakdown because I was about to receive money she thought belonged to her. "The will is clear," Mr. Harrison said firmly. "Unless there are grounds to contest." "Oh, there are grounds." Skylar's eyes were wild now. She married him for his money. Everyone knows it. She saw a sick man and thought she'd hit the jackpot. The room erupted. Her siblings started talking at once, agreeing with her, adding their own accusations. I heard words like gold digger, and fortune hunter, and manipulative. But I couldn't move. I just sat there frozen as they tore me apart. She doesn't deserve a cent, Skylar said, pointing at me like I was something disgusting. Not 1 cent of Morrison money. That's when Mr. Harrison made his mistake. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. I understand there are strong feelings here, he said, but legally, I'm required to present Mrs. Timothy Morrison with this inheritance check. We can discuss any challenges through proper legal channels. The check was cream-colored, official-looking. $2.7 million made out to Kelly Morrison. I stared at it, thinking about all the things Tim and I had planned to do together. The house we wanted to buy, the trips we'd talked about taking, the children we'd hoped to have. Skylar lunged for it. I don't know who moved faster, her or her brother Robert. But suddenly the check was in Robert's hands, and he was walking toward the fireplace in the corner of the conference room. No, Mr. Harrison said, standing up. You cannot destroy legal documents. This is highly irregular. But Robert was already there. He held the check up like a trophy, grinning at me. Oops, he said, and dropped it into the flames. I watched it burn. The edges curled first, then the numbers in the middle, 2,700,000, disappeared into ash. The family cheered. Actually cheered. Skylar clapped her hands together like she was at a celebration. Now you have nothing, she said, turning to face me. Her smile was vicious, triumphant. Nothing but what you came with. Which was nothing. Mr. Harrison was frantically gathering his papers. This is completely unacceptable. I'll need to contact the bank immediately. We can issue a replacement check, but this behavior. Good luck with that, Janet said, laughing. Lawyers cost money, honey. And what's she going to pay you with? They were all staring at me now, waiting for me to break down. Waiting for tears, for begging, for some kind of reaction that would prove what they'd always believed about me. But I didn't give them one. I sat perfectly still, watching the last pieces of that check turn to ash. Something cold and hard was settling in my chest, replacing the grief that had been living there for months. Kelly. Mr. Harrison's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? Do you need a moment? I stood up slowly, picked up my purse and looked around the room at all of them. Skylar's family. Tim's family. People who were supposed to have loved him, who were now celebrating the destruction of his final gift to me. I'm fine, I said quietly. And for the first time since Tim died, I meant it. Because they had no idea what they'd just done. They thought they'd won some kind of victory, stolen some treasure I didn't deserve. They thought burning that check meant I'd walk away with nothing. But the check wasn't the real inheritance. Tim's real gift to me was something much more valuable, something they couldn't burn or steal or contest in court. It was waiting for me at a fertility clinic across town, frozen and patient and full of possibilities they couldn't even imagine. I walked to the door without looking back. Behind me I could hear them talking, probably planning how to divide up the money they thought they'd saved from the gold-digging widow. Let them plan. Let them celebrate. Let them think they'd destroyed me. They had no idea I was just getting started. The elevator doors closed and I saw my reflection in the polished metal. I looked different somehow. Harder. The grieving widow was still there, but something else was emerging underneath. Something that Tim would have recognized. Something that wouldn't let them win. The building's lobby was full of lawyers and clients going about their normal business. People solving problems, making deals, fighting for what they believed they deserved. I walked through them toward the exit, already planning my next move. Skylar Morrison thought she'd just won the war. But she'd only won a battle and she'd shown me exactly who she really was in the process. Now I knew what I was fighting. And more importantly, I knew what I was fighting for. Not money. Not inheritance. Not even justice. I was fighting for Tim's real legacy. The one they could never touch. The one that would ultimately destroy them all. The drive to Riverside Fertility Clinic took 45 minutes from downtown, but I'd made this trip so many times during Tim's treatment that I could do it blindfolded. The receptionist, Maria, recognized me immediately when I walked through the glass doors. Mrs. Morrison, she said softly. I'm so sorry for your loss. We heard about Tim. I'd called ahead, explained the situation. My husband had passed away and I needed to discuss our frozen embryos. The conversation with Dr. Martinez was surprisingly straightforward. You have joint custody of the genetic material, she explained, pulling up our file on her computer. But since you're listed as the primary contact and decision maker, You have full legal rights to proceed whenever you're ready. Tim and I had been thorough with the paperwork. Maybe it was the nurse in me, but I'd read every single document, asked about every scenario. What if one of us died? What if we divorced? What if we changed our minds? We'd covered everything. How many embryos do we have? I asked. 7 viable embryos, all genetically normal. Excellent quality. 7 chances. 7 possibilities for the future Tim and I had dreamed about. I'd like to transfer my storage account to a different facility, I said. Somewhere more private. Dr. Martinez nodded. Of course. Do you have a preference? I'd already researched this. Mountain View Reproductive Center was 3 hours north, in a small college town where nobody knew the Morrison name, where I could disappear completely. The transfer took 2 weeks to arrange. I drove up on a Tuesday morning following the moving truck that contained our frozen future. The new clinic was smaller, more personal. Dr. Chin, the director, was a soft-spoken woman who'd worked in fertility medicine for 20 years. Take your time, she said when I explained that I wasn't ready to proceed yet. There's no expiration date on hope. But I was already planning more than hope. I was planning revenge. Finding the right town took months of research. I needed somewhere small enough that I could blend in, but large enough to have decent medical facilities and job opportunities. Willowbrook was perfect, a college town with a regional hospital, 2 hours from where the Morrisons lived. Far enough that I'd never accidentally run into them at a grocery store. Close enough that when the time came I could strike. I sold our house without telling anyone where I was going. Skylar had been calling constantly since the will reading, her lawyer trying to work out an arrangement about the inheritance. I let all the calls go to voicemail, then changed my number entirely. The apartment I rented was tiny, just a 1-bedroom above a bakery on Main Street. Nothing like the house Tim and I had shared, but it was mine. Nobody could take it away from me. Nobody could burn it to ashes while I watched. Getting hired at Willowbrook General was easy. Good nurses were always in demand, and my pediatric experience made me valuable. I took the night shift. It paid more, and I needed every penny for what was coming. The embryo transfer happened on a snowy Thursday in February. I'd been in Willowbrook for 8 months, long enough to establish residency, build a credit history, become just another single woman living quietly in a small town. Dr. Chin performed the procedure herself. Just 1 embryo today, she said. We want to give you the best chance of a healthy pregnancy. I lay on the examination table afterward, one hand on my stomach, thinking about Tim. Wondering if he would have approved of what I was doing. Wondering if this was justice or just revenge dressed up in prettier clothes. The pregnancy test was positive 2 weeks later. I cried in the bathroom of the clinic holding that little plastic stick. Happy tears, sad tears, scared tears all mixed together. Tim should have been there. We should have been calling our families, planning a nursery, arguing about baby names. Instead, I was completely alone with the biggest secret of my life. I didn't tell anyone at work until I couldn't hide it anymore. When people asked about the father, I said he died in an accident. It was close enough to the truth, and it shut down any uncomfortable questions about why I was doing this alone. James Timothy Morrison was born on a cold October morning after 12 hours of labor. The moment they placed him in my arms, I understood what people meant when they talked about love at first sight. He was perfect. Tim's dark hair, Tim's long fingers, Tim's serious expression even as a newborn. He looks like he's thinking deep thoughts, the nurse laughed. Just like his father, I whispered. Registering his birth was when I made my first strategic move. James Timothy Morrison. His father's full name, exactly as it appeared on our marriage certificate and Tim's death certificate. Every document perfectly legal, every connection to the Morrison family clearly established. I kept copies of everything. The fertility clinic records showing Tim as the biological father. The embryo transfer documentation. James's birth certificate with Tim's name in the father field. DNA was destiny, and I had all the proof I'd ever need. The first 2 years were the hardest. Working nights, caring for a baby during the day, surviving on 3 hours of sleep and pure stubbornness. But James was worth every sleepless night. He was curious and gentle, quick to laugh but thoughtful too. So much like Tim, it sometimes took my breath away. When he started talking, his first word was mama. His second was dada, and he'd look around the room like he was searching for someone who should be there. Dada's not here, baby, I'd tell him, But he loves you very much. I told James stories about his father from the beginning. How Tim loved blueberry muffins and terrible action movies. How he always sang in the car, even though he couldn't carry a tune. How he would have taught James to play baseball and helped him with his homework and been so proud of every little accomplishment. Your daddy was a good man, I'd say during bedtime stories. And someday you're going to get everything that should have been his. By the time James turned 3, I was ready to take the next step. I'd saved enough money to hire the right kind of lawyer. Someone who specialized in inheritance disputes and family law. Someone who understood that justice sometimes required patience. I found Rebecca Torres through a recommendation from a nurse at work whose family had gone through their own inheritance battle. Rebecca had a small practice in the state capital, but her reputation was fierce. She'd built her career representing people who'd been cheated out of what rightfully belonged to them. Our first meeting was in her cramped office above a deli. Rebecca was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a handshake that could crack bones. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I showed her the fertility records, the birth certificate, the documentation proving Tim was James's biological father. I told her about the will reading, about the burned check, about Skylar's family celebrating like they'd won the lottery. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and smiled. "They have no idea, do they?" "None." "Good." She leaned forward. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let them get comfortable. Let them think they've gotten away with it. People like that always get careless when they think they've won. How long? However long it takes. We need them to make mistakes to show their true nature publicly. The best revenge cases aren't won with evidence alone. They're won when the defendants destroy themselves." I thought about Skylar's vicious smile as she watched that check burn. About the way her family had cheered like they were at a football game. "They've already started destroying themselves," I said. Rebecca's smile got wider. "Then we just need to give them more rope." I left her office with a plan. Not just for getting back what Skylar had stolen, but for making sure she and her family paid for every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment they'd made me feel like I didn't belong. James was napping in his car seat when I got back to Willowbrook. I looked at him in the rearview mirror, Tim's son, sleeping peacefully, unaware that he was about to become the most powerful weapon in a war his grandmother had started. "Just a little longer, baby," I whispered. "And then we're going to get everything Daddy wanted you to have." The waiting game had begun. The waiting ended 3 years later when I opened the local newspaper and saw Morrison Industries on the front page. "Local construction company faces financial crisis," the headline read. I sipped my coffee slowly, reading every word while James ate his cereal at our small kitchen table. He was 6 now, chattering about his upcoming school play, unaware that his grandmother's world was crumbling 2 hours away. The article was brief but telling. Morrison Industries had lost 3 major contracts in the past 6 months. Suppliers were demanding payment up front. The company that had built half the shopping centers in the state was suddenly struggling to pay its bills. What the newspaper didn't know was that I'd been watching Morrison Industries' financial reports for 2 years. Public companies had to file certain documents, and Rebecca had taught me how to read them. More importantly, she taught me how to act on what I learned. KL Holdings was the name of my investment company. Kelly Louise, my initials, though nobody would ever make that connection. Over 3 years, I'd carefully purchased small stakes in companies that did business with Morrison Industries. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to have a voice when contracts came up for renewal. "Mrs. Chin," I'd say during board meetings using my mother's maiden name as my business identity. "I have concerns about Morrison Industries' ability to complete projects on schedule. Perhaps we should consider other options." I was just one voice among many, but doubt spreads like a virus in the business world. When you plant enough seeds of uncertainty, contracts start going to competitors. Payment terms get stricter. Credit lines get reviewed more carefully. The beautiful thing was that I never lied. Morrison Industries really was having problems. I just made sure the right people knew about them at the right times. James looked up from his cereal. "Mama, why are you smiling?" "Just thinking about something nice, baby." "What kind of nice?" "The kind where good things happen to good people." The real breakthrough came when I discovered that Morrison Industries had a silent partner, Westfield Development, owned by an elderly man named Harold Patterson. He'd invested $2 million 5 years ago and rarely attended board meetings. Rebecca found out he was in poor health and his daughter was handling his affairs. Buying Harold's share took 6 months of careful negotiation. His daughter, Susan, was tired of dealing with her father's complicated business investments. She wanted cash, not quarterly reports and construction delays. $2.2 million, she said during our final phone call. Take it or leave it. I took it. Every penny I'd saved, plus a loan secured against James's future inheritance. Because I knew something Susan Patterson didn't. That silent partnership came with veto power over major business decisions. The first time I exercised that power was when Morrison Industries tried to secure a loan to cover their cash flow problems. The bank required unanimous consent from all major shareholders. KL Holdings votes no, Rebecca announced during the conference call. Skylar's voice was sharp with confusion. Who is KL Holdings? I've never heard of this company. A private investment firm, the bank representative explained. They've held a significant stake in Morrison Industries for several months. I listened to the entire call from Rebecca's office, watching my lawyer take notes as Skylar's voice grew more desperate with each question. Who were these investors? How had they acquired Harold's share? What did they want? They want proper financial documentation, Rebecca said smoothly. Proof that Morrison Industries can meet its obligations. Standard business practice. What we really wanted was for Skylar to panic. And she did. Over the next 6 months, Morrison Industries hemorrhaged money trying to prove its stability. They hired expensive consultants, paid for independent audits, brought in crisis management specialists. Every dollar they spent trying to save the company pushed them deeper into debt. James started first grade that fall. He was smart, curious, always asking questions about everything. During parent-teacher conferences, Mrs. Rodriguez told me he was reading at a 4th grade level. He's going to do great things, she said. You must be so proud. His father would have been, I replied, thinking about Tim missing all these milestones. Meanwhile, the Morrison family's personal finances were collapsing along with their business. Rebecca had hired a private investigator, someone who specialized in financial tracking. The reports made for fascinating reading. Skylar had mortgaged the family estate to keep Morrison Industries afloat. When that wasn't enough, she'd borrowed against her personal investment accounts. Then came the credit cards, the personal loans, the desperate measures of someone watching their empire crumble. She's leveraged everything, Rebecca explained during one of our monthly meetings. The house, her retirement accounts, even her jewelry collection. If Morrison Industries fails, she loses it all. That's when I played my final card. The family estate had been Tim's childhood home, but it had an interesting legal history. His grandfather had originally deeded the property with a reversionary clause. If the direct male line ever died out, the property would return to the surviving spouse of the last male heir. Tim had been the last Morrison man. I was his surviving spouse. The clause was buried in paperwork from the 1940s, but Rebecca found it during her exhaustive research into the family's property records. It had been forgotten for decades, but it was still legally binding. When Skylar tried to sell the estate to pay her debts, she discovered the sale couldn't proceed. There was a claim on the property. A legal challenge that froze everything until it could be resolved in court. This is impossible, she told her lawyer, according to the court transcripts Rebecca obtained. Nobody else has any claim to this house. It's been in our family for 60 years. But the law disagreed. And while lawyers argued about deeds and reversionary clauses, Skylar couldn't sell the one asset that might have saved her. The newspapers picked up the story when Morrison Industries declared bankruptcy. Local business failing, prominent family facing financial ruin, estate tied up in legal battles. Skylar tried to control the narrative, giving interviews about economic hardship and predatory investors. We're victims of financial fraud, she told Channel 7 News, standing in front of the house she could no longer sell. Unknown parties have targeted our family business through shell companies and legal manipulation. I watched the interview from my living room while James played with his building blocks on the floor. Skylar looked older, smaller than I remembered. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes. These people are stealing our family's legacy, she continued. They're destroying everything my late son worked to build. Late son. Tim had become a convenient symbol now that she needed sympathy. The same son whose wife she'd humiliated and cheated out of her inheritance. "Mama," James said, looking up at the television. "That lady looks sad." "Sometimes people are sad when they lose things that were never really theirs to begin with," I told him. The bankruptcy auction was scheduled for December. Morrison Industries' assets would be sold to pay creditors. The company Tim's great-grandfather had started would cease to exist. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about destroying Skylar's business. It was about getting back what she'd stolen from James. What she'd burned while laughing in that lawyer's office 6 years ago. Rebecca had been right about letting them hang themselves first. Skylar's desperation had made her reckless. Her public claims about fraud and theft had opened doors we couldn't have opened otherwise. "Now?" Rebecca asked during our last meeting before filing the lawsuit. I looked at the stack of documents on her desk. DNA tests proving James was Tim's biological son. Birth certificates, medical records, inheritance claims. 7 years of careful preparation coming together in one devastating legal filing. "Now," I agreed. Outside Rebecca's office, snow was starting to fall. James was at school, probably looking out the window and hoping for a snow day. He had no idea that his grandmother's world was about to get much, much smaller. And that his own world was about to become everything his father had ever wanted it to be. The war Skylar started at that will reading was finally about to end. But this time I held all the cards. And unlike her, I wasn't planning to leave anything to chance. The courthouse steps were slippery from the morning frost when Rebecca and I arrived at 8:30. James was at school, safe from the media circus that was about to unfold. I told him Mama had an important meeting, nothing more. He was 7 now, old enough to ask questions but still young enough to accept simple answers. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, adjusting her briefcase strap. I nodded, though my stomach felt like it was full of broken glass. 7 years of planning had led to this moment. 7 years of careful moves, patient waiting, and sleepless nights wondering if I was doing the right thing for my son. The filing had been served 3 days earlier. Rebecca chose a Friday afternoon, ensuring Skylar would spend the weekend reading through 27 pages of legal accusations that would destroy everything she thought she knew about her perfect family. Inheritance fraud. Willful destruction of legal documents. Intentional interference with probate proceedings. And the big one, denying a minor child his rightful inheritance through deception and intimidation. The courthouse lobby buzzed with lawyers and their clients, but I spotted Skylar immediately. She sat on a wooden bench near the elevator, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Even from across the room I could see she'd lost weight. Her signature pearls hung loose around her neck, and her perfectly styled hair looked brittle under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Morrison?" A young reporter approached with a microphone. "I'm from Channel 12. Can you comment on the allegations in this lawsuit?" "No comment," Rebecca said firmly, stepping between us. "My client will address all questions through proper legal channels." But I caught Skylar's eye across the lobby. For a moment we stared at each other across 7 years of silence. She looked confused, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. He probably still thought this was about money. She had no idea what was really coming. Courtroom 3B was smaller than I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly, and chairs that had seen decades of family disputes and broken promises. Judge Patricia Williams presided, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and no patience for dramatics. Skylar's legal team tried every delay tactic in the book. Motions to dismiss, requests for continuances, challenges to the court's jurisdiction. But Rebecca had anticipated everything. Our documentation was airtight, our legal standing unshakable. "Your Honor," Skylar's lead attorney, Mr. Davidson, argued during preliminary motions, "this case appears to be a frivolous attempt to relitigate a settled estate. My client acted in good faith during the original probate proceedings." Judge Williams reviewed our filing with the thorough attention of someone who'd seen every trick lawyers could pull. "Mr. Davidson, your client allegedly destroyed a legal document worth $2.7 million. How exactly does that constitute good faith?" The document in question was a certified inheritance check issued by First National Bank, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. "We have video evidence of its destruction, witness testimony, and bank records confirming its validity." I'd forgotten about the security cameras in the lawyer's office until Rebecca's investigator tracked down the footage. Watching that video again, seeing Robert grab the check, hearing the family cheer as it burned, had brought back every emotion from that horrible day. But this time, instead of feeling powerless, I felt satisfaction. The real drama started when Rebecca called me to the witness stand. Please state your name for the record. Kelly Morrison. And your relationship to the deceased, Timothy Morrison? I was his wife. We were married for 5 years until his death from pancreatic cancer. I told the story chronologically. Meeting Tim, falling in love, the family's immediate disapproval. Our fertility struggles, the IVF procedures, the frozen embryos. Tim's illness, Skylar's invasive presence during his final months, and her complete takeover of our household. Did Mrs. Skylar Morrison ever express hostility toward you during your husband's illness? Constantly. She questioned every medical decision, dismissed my nursing background, and treated me like a visitor in my own home. Skylar's face grew redder with each revelation. Her attorney kept objecting, but Judge Williams overruled him every time. This was testimony about facts, not opinions. Please tell the court about the will reading. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I looked directly at Skylar as I spoke, watching her expression change from indignation to confusion to growing horror. Mrs. Morrison said I didn't deserve a cent of the family money. When the lawyer presented the inheritance check, her brother Robert grabbed it and threw it into the fireplace. The family celebrated while it burned. Then Mrs. Morrison told me I had nothing. And what was your response? I remained silent, because I knew something they didn't. Rebecca nodded. Can you explain what you mean by that? 3 years after Tim's death, I used our frozen embryos to conceive his child. My son James is Timothy Morrison's biological heir. The courtroom erupted. Skylar's face went white, then gray, like all the blood had drained from her body. Her attorney was frantically whispering in her ear, but she didn't seem to hear him. She just stared at me with her mouth slightly open. Judge Williams banged her gavel. Order in the courtroom. Rebecca continued with surgical precision. Do you have documentation proving this biological relationship? Yes. DNA tests confirming Timothy Morrison is James's father. Medical records from the fertility clinic. Birth certificate listing Timothy Morrison as the father. Every document has been authenticated by independent laboratories. I pulled out a photograph of James from my purse. His school picture from last month. Dark hair, serious brown eyes, the Morrison family chin that was unmistakable in every family portrait hanging in their estate. This is my son James Timothy Morrison. Age 7. Timothy Morrison's only child and rightful heir. Skylar made a sound like a wounded animal. Her hands started shaking so violently that her attorney had to steady her water glass. Your Honor, Davidson said desperately, we request a recess to review this new information. Motion denied, Judge Williams replied. You've had 3 days to prepare. Please continue, Ms. Torres. Rebecca played the security footage from the will reading. Watching it on the courtroom's large screen was different than seeing it on her laptop. Every detail was magnified, Robert's triumphant grin as he grabbed the check, the family's laughter, Skylar's vicious smile when she said I had nothing. Mrs. Morrison, Rebecca said, addressing Skylar directly for the first time, did you know that your daughter-in-law was carrying your grandson's genetic material at the time of this will reading? Skylar tried to speak but no words came out. She shook her head weakly. Did you know that by destroying that inheritance check, you were stealing money from a 7-year-old child? Objection, Davidson called out. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Williams said, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca presented our evidence methodically. The fertility clinic records. The embryo transfer documentation. James's birth certificate with Timothy Morrison clearly listed as the father. DNA test results showing a 99.97% probability of paternity. Each document was another nail in Skylar's coffin. By the time Rebecca finished, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that James was Tim's son and therefore the rightful heir to everything she'd stolen. The defendants not only destroyed legal documents, Rebecca concluded in her closing statement, they celebrated stealing from a child. They turned a family tragedy into their personal profit opportunity. Judge Williams deliberated for exactly 18 minutes. In the matter of Morrison versus Morrison, she announced, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendants willfully destroyed legal documents, interfered with proper probate proceedings, and denied a minor child his rightful inheritance. She ordered full restitution, the original $2.7 million plus 7 years of interest. Skylar's remaining assets were frozen pending payment. The family estate, already tied up in legal challenges, was transferred to James's trust immediately. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential elder abuse charges related to Mr. Timothy Morrison's final medical care. Skylar's face crumpled completely. She understood what that meant: criminal charges, public humiliation, possible jail time. As we gathered our papers, she tried to approach me near the courtroom doors. Kelly, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Please. I didn't know about the baby. If I had known. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent years making me feel worthless, who had stolen my husband's final gift to me, who had celebrated my pain like it was a victory. You knew Tim loved me, I said quietly. That should have been enough. Then I walked past her toward the exit, where Rebecca was already fielding questions from reporters. Behind me, I heard Skylar collapse into her attorney's arms, sobbing. But I didn't look back. The war was over. And Tim's son had won everything his father had wanted him to have. The moving truck pulled away from the Morrison estate on a Tuesday morning in April, leaving tire tracks in the gravel driveway that hadn't been maintained properly in years. James stood beside me on the front steps, his small hand tucked into mine, staring up at the house that was now legally his. It's really big, Mama, he said quietly. Too big, I agreed. But we'll make it feel like home. The house had been empty for 8 months while the legal proceedings dragged on. Skylar had been forced to move out the day after the court ruling, taking only her personal belongings. Everything else, the furniture, the artwork, even the family photographs, belonged to James now. Walking through those rooms again felt like stepping back in time. The dining room where I'd endured so many uncomfortable family dinners. The kitchen where Skylar had made that phone call about me not deserving anything. The living room where she'd burned my inheritance while her family cheered. But James saw none of that history. He ran from room to room like any 7-year-old exploring a new house, his footsteps echoing in the empty spaces. Can this be my room? He asked, pushing open the door to what had been Tim's childhood bedroom. The walls were still covered with faded baseball posters and academic achievement awards. A bookshelf held dusty trophies and model airplanes. It was like a museum of Tim's youth, preserved exactly as he'd left it when he went to college. If that's what you want, I said, though my throat felt tight. Tim would have loved seeing his son choose this room. We started small. New paint. James chose blue for his bedroom walls. Fresh curtains throughout the house. I hired a cleaning service to deep clean every inch, erasing years of neglect and sadness. We kept some of the original furniture but donated most of it to charity. The house needed to be ours, not a monument to the Morrison family's past glory. The hardest decision was what to do with Tim's things. Skylar had packed them hastily when she moved out, shoving clothes and personal items into boxes without care. I found his college textbooks mixed with old bills, his watch tangled up with broken Christmas ornaments. James helped me sort through everything. He was fascinated by his father's belongings, college photos, letters Tim had written to me during business trips, even his collection of terrible action movie DVDs. Dad liked really bad movies, I explained, holding up a DVD of something called Explosive Justice 3. James giggled. Were they funny bad or just bad? Funny bad. He used to make popcorn and we'd watch them together, making jokes about the ridiculous plots. We created a memory room in what used to be Tim's home office. Photos of him throughout his life, his college diploma, the leather jacket he'd worn on our first date. James could visit whenever he wanted to feel close to the father he'd never met. The financial settlement took 6 months to process completely. $3.7 million including interest and penalties. More money than I'd ever imagined having. More than enough to secure James's future and fulfill the promise I'd made to Tim. The Timothy Morrison Foundation launched that fall. Rebecca helped me set up the legal structure. A charitable trust dedicated to helping single mothers and children who'd been denied their rightful inheritances. We started small with a few cases Rebecca had encountered in her practice. Maria Santos was our first recipient. Her ex-husband had hidden assets during their divorce, leaving her and their 2 children in poverty while he lived comfortably with his new wife. The foundation paid for the private investigator who found his offshore accounts. Then came the Williams family, 3 children whose grandfathers had been manipulated by a greedy nephew. Their case had been going on for years because they couldn't afford proper legal representation. Each case felt personal. Every child we helped felt like a victory for James, for Tim, for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't deserve what was rightfully theirs. James thrived in his new school. The local elementary was smaller than his old one in Willowbrook, but the teachers were excellent and he made friends quickly. He never mentioned having more money than his classmates. To him, the big house was just where he lived, not a symbol of wealth. "Why don't we have fancy cars like the Hendersons?" he asked one day after a playdate. "Because fancy things don't make you happy," I said. "Good friends and family make you happy." He considered this seriously. "Is that why Dad didn't care about Grandma's money?" I stopped folding laundry and looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You said he wanted to marry you even though his family didn't like it. So he chose love instead of money, right?" Sometimes my 7-year-old son was wiser than adults with decades more experience. "Yes," I said. "He chose love." The jar sat on my bedroom dresser for months before James found it. I'd kept the ashes from that burned check, not out of bitterness but as a reminder of what had brought us to this point. James discovered it while looking for a hair tie, dumping the gray dust onto my dresser before I could stop him. "What's this?" he asked, poking at the ashes with his finger. I sat down on the bed and pulled him close. "That used to be a check. Money that was meant for us after your daddy died. What happened to it?" "Some people burned it because they didn't think we deserved it." James frowned, trying to understand. "But why would they burn money?" "Because they thought money was more important than people. They thought if they could take it away from us they would win." "Did they win?" I smiled, ruffling his dark hair that looked so much like Tim's. "What do you think?" He looked around our house, his house, then back at the ashes on the dresser. "No. We won. Because we have everything we need." "And what's that?" "Each other. And this house where Dad grew up. And enough money to help other people." He paused thoughtfully. "Plus, I think Dad would be proud of us." "I think so too." The news about Skylar came through Rebecca 6 months later. She'd moved in with her cousin Janet in a small apartment across town. The elder abuse investigation had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but her reputation was destroyed. The woman who'd once run charity galas and sat on hospital boards was now dependent on family members who treated her like a burden. She tried to apply for financial assistance through the county, Rebecca told me during one of our monthly check-ins. Apparently she's having trouble paying for her medications. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy but not satisfaction either. "Does she need help?" Rebecca looked surprised. "Are you thinking of—" "No," I said quickly. "I just wondered if she was okay." "She made her choices, Kelly. She could have welcomed you into the family. She could have accepted Tim's decision to marry you. Instead she chose cruelty and greed." I nodded, but that night I lay awake thinking about Skylar in her cousin's spare bedroom, probably wondering how her perfect life had fallen apart so completely. She'd gambled everything on the assumption that she could control her family's destiny and she'd lost. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired of carrying anger around like heavy luggage. The real victory was James's laughter echoing through the halls of his father's childhood home. It was the thank you letters from families we'd helped through the foundation. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Tim's legacy wasn't about money or business empires, but about love and justice and the kind of patience that outlasts cruelty. Sometimes, late at night when James was asleep, I'd walk through the house and think about Tim. How proud he would be of his son's kindness. How happy he'd be that we'd turned his childhood home into a place of joy instead of judgment. "We did it," I'd whisper to his memory. "We didn't let them win." And in the quiet of those moments, surrounded by the peace we'd built from the ashes of their hatred, I knew Tim was smiling too. The war was over. Love had won. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. If this story of ultimate justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Kelly revealed James in court, watching Skylar's face turn white as her world crumbled. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.